We will actually move on now to risks and reinsurance, and we will ask David Bresch, who is with us on a video conference. We are doing exactly what you encouraged us to do. And David Bresch, he heads the Sustainability and Political Risk Management unit at Swiss Re. And of course, for Swiss Re, as a global risk taker, climate issues feature prominently on the agenda. And David Bresch, he has also been a member of the official Swiss delegation to numerous COP meetings, Copenhagen, Cancun, Durban and Doha. Welcome. I hope you can hear us well, and I leave the floor to you. Thank you, David, for being with us, although not in person.
Good morning. You hear me like that?
We hear you.
Perfect. I'd really like to thank, to give the opportunity to talk to you. It's a pleasure to be connected by video, and also a bit of an apology not being there physically, but I think in the spirit of the challenge ahead, this is probably a contribution we should more often think about. I'd like to kick it off basically one or two remarks about what the reinsurance industry as a sector brings to the table, and then go a bit deeper into the challenge and how we think we can bring something towards a solution. But I have to state right from the beginning, the challenge at hand is one no sector alone, no country alone can resolve, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're not on track regarding this challenge. Also, just to state here, Swiss Re is carbon neutral. We've been so since 2003, and as just mentioned by the colleague from CDP, we do think that efforts like CDP are absolutely crucial to get these things moving faster than we've been doing so in the past. Probably moving to slide number 2, risk reinsurance. Basically, we enable risk-taking that is essential to progress, but we do enable risk-taking in a very comprehensive and in a conscious fashion. So first and foremost, we help putting risks on a table. That's why Swiss Re has for more than 20 years been very vocative about climate change, the challenges, and also the solutions we bring to it. So we basically identify and evaluate risk. We then take and select risk. We do that in a very, very deep dialogue with stakeholders, not only our clients, also society at large. Again, that's why I'm really pleased to be here. We basically base a lot of our risk evaluations on very strong collaborations with science and academia at large. That's why we've been involved in the IPCC process also since it starts in the say early mid-90s. Sometimes in some issuances like this one, almost the latest one, as a review author, where we do think we bring something to the table. So not so much in chapter 1, more on the impact side, honestly, to be speaking here. But we do take the IPCC findings as a starting point in our strategy and as a starting point of our discussions. So we take that piece of work as the relevant contribution to the challenge from the science side. We do transfer trade risk, and we can do that exactly as I mentioned on the solid basis on the basis of understanding the key drivers and also the different motivations of the stakeholders. And last but not least, we educate and consult on risk. Again, as we know, that some of the risks, if there's no shared mental model of what this risk means to society, there is no business angle to it. So that's why we've been so vocal for a very long time on the specific issue of climate change. Moving on to slide number 3, just a brief look at past natural catastrophe losses of the last 30 years. Tremendous increase in the loss burden. We basically push through the 400 billion annual loss burden on a global scale for economic losses, and then you have in grey the indication of the insured part of these losses. And there's a gap, and this gap means that the insurance industry is helping societies dealing with these issues, but it can do more, it could do more, and I come to that in a second. Now, looking at this development and just relating that to climate change, one might get into the false kind of interpretation of that would all be driven by climate change. The primary driver is shown on slide number 4, so the next one. The main driver of natural catastrophes and losses in the past has been economic development, development in coastal regions, the economy, especially of wealth in coastal regions, because these are the places where trade happens and very intense development happens. But it needs to be noted that going forward, climate change and its impact on local communities and the economy will be a more and more important part of this equation. I come to that back in a second. Also important to know, that's the next slide, climate risks are highly interconnected, and that's why a single kind of actor like the insurance sector cannot do it alone. We all know greenhouse gas emissions do drive global temperatures. That has an impact on the complex climate system in terms of more frequent and more severe extremes. Even so, the IPCC struggles there to put exact numbers down, that we cannot afford ourselves to sit and wait until we know it the hard way. So we have to start acting on it. And if you look at the projections, they tell us a quite clear picture. And last but not least, these impacts on the climate system go far beyond the extremes, far beyond single specifics. It's really pushing a lot of pushing our ecosystems to probably some of their tolerance thresholds, and that will lead to issues like food security, has impacts on health, might lead even to resource conflict, migration ultimately, and that's why we do have to tackle the problem at its root cause, and closing basically this by really regulating greenhouse gas emissions on a global scale. So we strongly advocate that. Swiss Re advocates a price tag on carbon, as that would be a way to internalize a known externality, making just reference to the Stern report, which stated that very clearly. So on slide 6, there is a very strong need for low carbon development, as I just stated, and on the other hand, to a climate compatible development in the sense of looking at how we can strengthen the resilience of communities across the globe. But let me first spend 1 or 2 minutes on low carbon development. That's next slide, slide number 7. We've just published a report how we can build a sustainable energy future. And as you might guess from a global reinsurer who diversifies risks across the globe, we look both as risk as well as opportunities. And we realized it's really a portfolio approach that's absolutely needed here. It's one size fits all. There's not the silver bullet technology which will save us. It is a very, very complex combination. And that's why I put down there the link and tag. So if you'd like to go deeper into the report, please do so. On slide 8, I just summarized very briefly the key findings of this effort. And in fact, this effort forms the basis of our energy strategy within the group. Basically, we realized that even this ambitious policy, it will be very, very difficult to stay within the 1.5 or the 2 degree realm of the climate system. So there's a huge challenge to us how to deal with that. And that's why point number 2, adaptation is one of the things we do have to look into. We all know the famous statement, we should avoid the unmanageable, but we have to basically manage the unavoidable. That will be later covered a bit in detail. And we do think, yes, the energy system faces fundamental changes, and we can be an enabler of that because there are investment opportunities doing greening the economy and reducing the carbon footprint of our economies. But it doesn't come for free, and that it doesn't come automatically. And that's why the reinsurance industry, with a long tradition in de-risking investments, has a role to play, and we definitely up to that challenge. I would like to leave the low carbon development challenge with that, just making reference to the deeper report. In fact, it was a scenario-based exercise to really look at different pathways and how we could help them converge on a positive outcome. And with that, on slide number 9, I'm basically focusing on the adaptation challenge. We do know, yes, we both need low carbon development and climate resilient development, so let's focus on the second piece, climate resilient development. Slide number 10 shows us basically just the basic report we published 2009, in fact, in the run-up to Copenhagen, how such a climate resilient development can really be shaped, in essence, looking at the economics of climate adaptation. Economics in the wider societal sense, how to best allocate resources to reach a shared goal. And on slide number 11, I share with you on the top the key findings, and then in the remaining couple minutes, I'm going to comment a bit on how we got to these findings. We do find in about 20 studies across the globe, all sectors, all different political systems, different constituencies, different hazards, we do find adaptation measures are available to make societies more resilient. And they should be an urgent priority for custodians of national and local economies, such as finance ministers and political leaders at large. The number 2 bullet there is important. Decision makers need facts in order to identify these most cost-effective actions. And that's why, point number 3, we formed or are proud to be part of the Economics of Climate Adaptation group, which developed this methodology to provide decision makers with such a fact base. It does allow decision makers then to really look at a plethora or a kind of a basket of adaptation options to really combine climate adaptation with sustainable growth. And last but not least, last bullet on slide number 11, the insurance industry is a partner in that challenge. Basically, insurance puts a price tag on risk, and that helps us trade and share risk in order to better diversify across the globe. But insurance has a second implication. By putting a price tag on risk, you also remind people not only it's not for free, but also you could possibly reduce that price tag by your own actions. So investing in prevention and preparedness is often the cheaper option than to seek insurance cover. You might find that interesting that an insurance company states that so bluntly. But wouldn't we really look at the economics in that comprehensive fashion, we might reach the limits of insurability. And that's not in our interest either. So we very much focus also on this comprehensive approach. And that's slide number 12, where we basically propose a methodology to inform decision makers on this fact-based approach. The second paragraph there, we developed a methodology which focuses on total climate risk. So be reminded when I showed you the Nat Cat loss development of the last 30 years, it was a tremendous increase in the loss burden, primarily driven by the risk landscape today, by economic development, number 2, and then climate change aggravating the situation in the coming decades. And that's why we really assess local total climate risk when we talk about how we provide such a fact base to decision makers. Just to note, we couldn't have done this in isolation, so it's a team behind. Swiss Re has been the key modeling partner in that effort. On slide number 13, I'll show you that in concept how it works. So on the left, you have basically risk today in yellow. Then we run our models again, which projected economic growth. That's the orange part, so an additional piece of risk that comes over time due to economic development. And last but not least, additional risk due to climate change. And say, on a time scale of the next 2 decades, we can then state what's the modeled, so it's a model framework assessment of future risk. That's on the left. So basically, we assess total climate risk. And on the right of slide 13, you see how we then propose solutions. On the horizontal axis, we chart out the loss or damage aversion potential of adaptation measures that could be taken. And on the vertical axis, the cost-benefit ratio. There's a couple things you could do to reduce your exposure to climate change. And there are things to share your risk, like insurance. And then there are some quite costly and not that effective options. That's gray in the picture. And you might first focus left to right on the more economically attractive options. On slide 14, we show you a bit of a global overview. We've applied the methodology in 18 regions. Latest contribution to that landscape was the study we've supported the city of New York in shaping their climate resilience strategy. And I'm going to share with you, to conclude, our findings for the Caribbean region, where we looked in 8 countries in that region and looked at all relevant economic sectors. What we found, and that's 15, in Barbados, the risk, total climate risk to the country of Barbados is doubling within only 20 years. That's quite a lot, and quite a challenge to the local economy. Well, you also see that the local economy is the key driver of that change. And climate change, under certain scenario assumptions, and we can go into the details in the links provided, basically does also further aggravate the issue. So this specific country is faced with the challenge of doubling its risk footprint, say, over the next 2 decades. And what we propose in order of actions to mitigate that risk, that's slide number 16, where from left to right, you have all the kind of options decision makers could envisage to lower the risk burden to their economies, to their societies. On the vertical axis, again, we reminded the cost-benefit ratio. And you see from left to right, extremely attractive options. Reef revival, mangrove revival, so ecosystem-based adaptation is often an extremely, economically, extremely attractive option to be considered. So we calculated often it's 1 cent, in fact, of investment in sound ecosystem that delivers $1 in risk mitigation. And then it goes on into technical measures, and the biggest contribution comes from building codes and enforcement of building codes, where at least you get an economically attractive picture that 90 cents invested in good building practice delivers $1 loss averted. And then come less attractive options to the far right of the picture. That was one case study, but to show it's not that easy in all countries, on slide number 17, you have the case of St. Lucia, where only 16% of the adaptation measures have net economic benefit. For different reasons, again, a link is provided if you'd like to read about those. So for these small island states, there are challenges they can by no means resolve in isolation by themselves. And that's why we've been very proud and happy to be part of the Caribbean Cat Risk Insurance Facility, a mechanism which allows Caribbean island states to share risk across their boundaries, and in that sense, basically indemnify their economic development against some of these challenges. And on slide number 18, it's a bit of the economics behind the Caribbean Cat Risk Insurance Facility. And I should have stated at the beginning, all this study we've done in close collaboration with the CCRIF, as the acronym reads. So on slide number 18, you basically have a picture of what a 100-year event to the island of St. Lucia might look like. Depending on a kind of referencing to our models, it might lead to an impact of 1.5 or 1.4 billion US dollars in loss once every 100 years to the island state of St. Lucia. A small amount, 60 million only, can be cost effectively averted, as seen on the previous slide, so 16% of that order of. And there's a certain amount of acceptable loss because the budget might tolerate, and there is a residual loss to be covered somehow. I'm almost finished it, thanks for the hint. So the far right of the slide, you basically have 2 options. You could either invest in further risk mitigation measures that would cut out 60% of this billion remaining loss at the cost of about 100 million annual expenditure to make that happen. Or you could share your risk across the island states at the cost of only about $30 million a year with 100% coverage in case of an event. And I'd like to basically wrap it here and say, by no means adaptation solves the issue at its root cause. We do need to reduce emissions. That's a part where we play a strong role enabling this change in the energy system by taking out some of the risks of these investments that need to be taken or be made. And on the other hand, we help societies to become more resilient by just mechanisms as the one shown for the Caribbean. I would leave it here and thank for your attention and definitely open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very effective and facts-based presentation, and of course a lot of food for thought, not least the fact that these are real costs. This is real money and real. One of the first slides you showed was natural catastrophes, and what has been insured and what was not insured. And of course I'm interested in maybe hearing, are you a rare bird within the within this sector of insurance companies and reinsurance business, or what would you say, what is the level of awareness and the level of engagement in this sector today? Are you, as a matter of fact, very much in the lead, or is it because we can also see that this means business, of course, higher premiums and what have you? Maybe you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I had trouble hearing the question, so I paraphrase very briefly, and then just to check I answer the right question. So a question in essence is this an industry shared perspective I've been shown, or is it pretty much Swiss Re's own, and what's basically the extent to this is shared already in the industry? Is that correct? Well, we are definitely proud to be not amongst the laggards, but we would be even prouder would there be a larger group of those at the forefront. The leading competitors, and often its partners in reinsurance, they are aware of the issue. I could definitely say so. And our main competitor is absolutely up to the challenges we are. We're very vocal on that, and often in a concerted fashion, because this is a pre-competitive challenge we have to solve here, because without the proper awareness, there is not much you can deliver on the solution side. I think importantly in that context are the UN Principles for Sustainable Insurance. We've been very proud co-launching in Rio a year ago, and we've already reported against these principles for the first time in our corporate responsibility reporting this spring. So basically, the insurance industry at large is aware of the issues. There are different levels of participation in that dialogue. I definitely welcome a stronger push, but I think it's recognized. What we struggle a lot of is to find the right interlocutor, the right counterpart to discuss not only the issue, but it really drives towards solutions. Because companies often have a function of a CFO or a chief risk officer or a chief resilience officer in their organization, not so much does this exist already on the country risk management side. And often, therefore, it's a challenge to find the right counterpart to, for example, continue working on economics of adaptation. So we're pushing very hard to establish this role of a chief risk officer or chief resiliency officer, as now, for example, the city of New York is messaging.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions in the audience to David Bresch? If not, thank you very much. This worked extremely well, and thank you for being with us.